They said I wasn't anybody. Just another old man killing time in a federal building lobby. One of the security guards joked that I probably wandered off from some VA clinic, said it loud enough for the vending machine to hear it echo. Another one asked if I'd gotten lost looking for the DMV. They laughed, just loud enough to make sure I heard. I didn't argue. I never do. I just sat still on that bench at Lockridge Complex, left side of the atrium, beneath that old, flickering security camera. My coat zipped up to the neck, one gloved hand resting on my duffel bag, the other cradling a manila folder sealed with red wax. I had my reasons. The truth is, I'd waited 32 years to hand-deliver that folder. And I wasn't early, I was exactly on time. But they didn't see it that way. To them, I was background noise. Dead weight in a chair. "Sir, you can't sleep here," one of them said, tapping the edge of his baton against my boot. I looked up slow, let my eyes meet his gray meeting gray. "Wasn't sleeping," I told him. "Just remembering." That's when things changed. Not for them. For me. Because I knew what was about to happen. I knew what that patch meant on the inside of my coat, the one he never looked close enough to recognize. The one only 7 living people on this coast still know how to interpret. And as the second guard reached for my arm, fingers tight on the strap of his stun baton, I thought about the box back at my apartment. The one above the heater, still sealed. Shadowwood, double clasp, never opened since 1972. The landlord would find it soon enough. Maybe the nurse would open it, after another shift where she called me a quiet type, with a vague military past. When she did, she'd see a medal no longer issued, a coin pressed with a ghost unit seal, and a letter signed in blue ink by a man whose name triggers security audits when typed into any DoD system. But none of that mattered now. Not yet. Because 7 minutes after that baton clicked on, after they shoved me against the wall and told me to leave or be charged with loitering, the phone rang in the operations office upstairs. Red line. Not a local call. The receptionist's face changed. So did the guard captain's voice. And when they ran the clearance code I'd scribbled on the edge of my old VA card, the system stalled, locked, and rebooted. "Who is this man?" they asked over the intercom. And the answer came not from me, but from the Pentagon. If you agree that some uniforms never fade, and some missions never end, then like and subscribe, because this isn't a story about power. It's about patience. And what happens when you mistake silence for surrender. I didn't come to be seen. I came to be recognized. I sat there, steady, as protocol flipped upside down. The hallway cleared. Radios buzzed with new instructions. The base commander's aide came jogging down the corridor in dress shoes. "Mr. Leonard Ward?" he asked, breathless. "Colonel Hayes is waiting upstairs, sir." "Sir." Not "sir," like you say to strangers when you're being polite. "Sir," like you say when you've read the classified locks. I nodded, took my duffel, and followed him through the magnet-locked doors without needing a badge. Every camera in the building tracked me now. Not because I was a threat, but because I was a name on a list no one ever expected to activate. They brought me into a briefing room that smelled like bleach and burnt coffee. Screens lined the wall, satellite feeds in soft grayscale. Someone handed me water. Someone else stood at attention. Colonel Hayes walked in a moment later, not in full dress, but sharp enough to make the room snap to shape. He looked at me, not confused, not surprised. Just serious. He extended his hand. "You built the contingency plan in '92, he said. "And you just triggered it." I nodded once. The manila folder I brought hit the table like a detonator. I opened it carefully, revealing a single-page memo with a glyph few people can even draw from memory. His eyes changed when he saw it. Then I gave the rest. A flash drive, a map, a hand-annotated checklist of vulnerabilities that had quietly emerged over the last 2 years. Things I'd tracked from park benches, transit terminals, and quietly observed site tours. I hadn't spoken at a podium in decades, but I didn't stutter once. Because this wasn't a warning. This was a report. And it started exactly where they thought it would end, with a man sleeping in a chair. The guards who tried to evict me? They were gone now. Quietly pulled into an internal review. Someone issued an apology that never reached me. Didn't need to. I'd already moved on to the briefing. I laid out the breach pathways like topography, outlined who was watching the watchers. You can't see the cracks when you stand too close. But I've been far away for a long time. That's the job. That's always been the job. I didn't need clearance to see what was coming. I built the clearance so others could catch up. That night, they changed the alert protocol for 3 buildings in the capital zone. Added a name to the secure override list that hadn't been used in 28 years. And when I left Lockridge Complex, no one asked me for ID. The same guards who mocked me that morning saluted from inside the glass. I nodded back. Just enough. Because this isn't a story about revenge. It's about what happens when you stay ready, when you sit still long enough to be underestimated, and then remembered. Not because you demanded it, but because the mission always knew where you were. They gave me a name badge this time, Tipperary of course, but printed in black instead of blue, which told me someone upstairs had already cleared the way. I didn't clip it on, just slid it into my coat pocket and walked past the checkpoint like I'd built the floor plan, because in some ways, I had. The elevator ride to sublevel 3 was silent except for the quiet hum of the internal encryption fan. Funny what you notice when you're not trying to be impressed. I'd spent decades in rooms like this. The names change. The threats change. But the patterns? They're always the same. Complacency first. Disbelief second. Panic third. But I didn't bring panic. I brought patterns. And those are harder to ignore. Colonel Hayes waited for me in Ops Chamber D, standing with a small group, 3 analysts, 1 cyber intelligence rep, and a younger lieutenant whose fingers twitched every time I looked his direction. That one had already skimmed my dossier, at least what hadn't been burned in '96. "Mr. Ward," Hayes said, "I reviewed the payload you submitted. There are details that cross timelines we didn't even know overlapped." I nodded. He gestured toward the wall screen. "We'd like you to walk us through the full breach prediction." I didn't waste time. I pulled out the notebook, spiral-bound, duct-taped at the edges, worn smooth from coffee rings and bus station benches. Inside, not printouts. Not flash drives. Just handwritten entries, dates, small anomalies, a badge swipe 1 hour too early on the 14th of March, a cable technician badge scanned 3 times in 1 week for a building with no open work orders. A vendor supply manifest that included an outdated model of fiber relay no longer in inventory since 2013. Each event alone? Unimportant. Together? Predictive. I flipped to a map I'd redrawn twice since January. For breach nodes. 1 confirmed. 2 within days. 1 already inside. I pointed. "This one here, Building C9, Southgate intake, night staff rotation, who's been monitoring the badge log?" The lieutenant answered first, voice tight. "That entrance was decommissioned 2 years ago. No active scans." I stared at him for half a breath longer than polite. "That's what you were told." I watched a man walk through it last Thursday. No uniform. No hesitation. The room quieted. I dropped a Polaroid on the table. Blurry. Zoomed. But real. Hayes leaned in. "You've been watching us?" I didn't smile. "I've been watching what's watching you." That changed the air. The analysts got quiet. The cyber guy typed something into his terminal without asking. Across the room, someone keyed in a silent alert code. Seconds later, Hayes' phone lit up. A red notification. A breach timestamp 3 minutes prior. You could feel the air drop 10 degrees. They scanned cameras, nothing visible. But I already knew. Check substation D, southwest conduit line. They hesitated, then moved. A junior officer dispatched security. 5 minutes later, a technician was found unconscious behind the breaker panel, ID badge cloned from a real employee who hadn't been on site in weeks. The man got away, but not without leaving his pulse on a biometric tag. They tracked the signal to an external uplink system. And that's when the questions stopped. That's when they stopped doubting who I was. I didn't raise my voice. Didn't say "I told you so." I just laid down the last page of the notebook. A phrase written in red ink. "Optus Protocol Reactivate Authorizer. Ward. L." The room stopped. That code wasn't supposed to exist anymore. That protocol hadn't been seen since the cold corridors of 1994. Hayes exhaled hard. "That protocol's buried under presidential exceptions." I nodded, which is why I carried it in my pocket. The aide in the corner left the room. A phone call was made, somewhere 3 floors up. And less than 10 minutes later, a familiar voice crackled on the room's encrypted line. "General Renix, Joint Threat Response, Eastern Division." "Leonard," she said. "Not Mr. Ward. Not Sir. Not Agent. Just Leonard. It's been a while." I stepped forward, speaking clearly. "Ma'am, we've got movement. Not simulated. Not staged. This is real time." There was a pause. Then her voice sharpened. "Is this war level real or standard response?" The colonel glanced at me. I answered. "It's already inside. You'll want to activate Tier 6 containment." Another pause. Then she said 2 words that shifted the entire day, "Ward Command." The colonel turned, stunned. The room moved instantly. That phrase? It overrides local authority. Freezes internal assets. Activates a dormant contingency team that hasn't been used since a chemical theft in 2001. The guards who tossed me earlier? They were already in holding. The system pulled their security logs, body cam footage, biometric access, even the jokes they thought weren't recorded. No reprimands were issued. They were simply removed. Not out of revenge, but out of procedure. I didn't ask for it. I didn't need it. Because this wasn't about proving who I was. It was about proving I never stopped watching. Because the ones who know where the cracks are? We don't need uniforms to matter. We just need enough silence to finish the job. That night, Lockridge Complex updated its emergency escalation matrix. The top line now reads, if identified by Ward's signature protocol, bypass all clearance levels. Route directly to Tier 1 Response Command. I was offered a new ID badge. I declined. I kept the paper one. Not because I needed proof, but because I liked the way it folded. I walked out the same doors they tried to shove me through earlier. Except this time, no one spoke. No one mocked. A few even stood. Not for me, but for what I carried. And for what almost walked past them unseen. They offered me an office after that clean desk, new computer, nameplate with block lettering that looked too polished to feel real. They said they needed someone like me to consult, part-time, off-books, discreet. Said they'd clear out the old files, reissue credentials, maybe even bring in a few analysts to help digitize my systems, whatever that meant. I said no. Not out of bitterness. Not out of pride. Just because I'd already done my work. I'd written it in the folds of a paper notebook, on train tickets, on back of envelope sketches pinned with gum to hotel walls, passed through coffee-stained hands across 5 cities and 2 decades. The job was never about the badge. It was about being there when they forgot they still needed someone watching. I asked instead for one thing, that the bench stay right where it was, left side of the atrium at Lockridge Complex, under the old camera that still flickered when the lights powered on too fast. They asked why, confused. I told them the truth, because people only remember what's important if it stays in their line of sight. And sometimes the most dangerous thing in the world isn't a breach or a virus or a foreign signal. It's forgetting who was watching when the lights were off. And for once, they listened. They didn't bronze it. Didn't rope it off. Just added a small placard near the base of the leg, brushed steel, easy to miss unless you were looking. It reads, Reserved, Asset L, Ward. Tier 1 clearance, status, always active. No one sits there now. They say they're not allowed. But I never said that. I just haven't been back. Not because I disappeared, but because I didn't need to stay. My message was delivered, the breach sealed, the notebook archived, not in some classified vault, but in a scanned file uploaded to a system that now pings every time a credential anomaly appears within 50 miles of capital airspace. Sometimes I still get calls. Burner phones, midnight rings, voices I haven't heard since the Gulf or the Balkans. Some ask if it was real. Others say thank you. But the ones that matter never ask anything. They just say, bitch is still there, and hang up. That's enough. Because this was never about recognition. It was about readiness. There was a time, long ago, when I thought maybe I'd be remembered through ceremony. Through medals. Speeches. The flag folded in triangles. But I've come to understand something better. True respect doesn't show up on stage. It arrives quietly. In a hallway. On a call. In the way a young officer pauses at a bench they used to ignore. I heard that one of the guards, one of the men who tasered me, filed a request to join internal threat analysis after his review. Another one? He wrote a letter. Not to me, to himself. His apology never reached my door, but his file now reads disciplinary cleared, transferred to Fort Griffin Cybersecurity. I'm not angry. They were doing their job the way they were trained. They were taught to look for threats that look dangerous. But the real ones never wear neon signs. They sit quietly. Watch everything. Wait for a system to forget itself. That's why I never stood up. Not until the right eyes were watching. Now, there's talk of using the Ward protocol as a case study in new security training, how silence is an asset, not an error. How old men with paper notebooks can still disable a breach with a red pen and a steady hand. There's even a photograph floating around. Me, sitting on that bench, one hand on my back, the other resting on my knee, looking at nothing, but seeing everything. They say it's being used in a lecture at Quantico. I don't need to see it. I remember it. Because I was there. I was always there. When the lights dimmed, when the halls emptied, when the next mission rotated in and forgot the last one ever happened, I stayed. Not for the glory. For the gap. That small blind spot between protocol and instinct. That's where I've always lived. The notebook is gone now, shredded, as ordered. The last entry I ever wrote simply said, "They looked away." So I watched. And now, others are watching too. The system remembers me. Not because I forced it to, but because, for 7 minutes, it didn't. And that was enough to wake the whole thing up. I'm not a ghost. I'm not a legend. I'm not a war hero. I'm just a man who didn't leave the post. And the post? It's still there. Left side of the atrium. Under that flickering camera. They still call it Ward's Corner. And sometimes, just sometimes, when I walk by from the street, coat zipped up, hat pulled low, I see a new recruit sitting there. No phone. No music. Just sitting. Watching. And when I pass, they nod. They don't know my name. But they know why the bench matters. And that's all I ever needed.